Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Marissa Kozlov. It's great to have you with us for today's eMarketer Tech Talk, where we host guests from all areas of media, ad tech, and martech. Joining us again for another update on what's ahead for retail is a longtime friend of the show here, Ethan Chernofsky, Senior Vice President of Marketing at Placer.ai. Hi, Ethan, and happy holidays to you.
Happy holidays, Marissa. It's great to be here.
So good to have you with us today. And, Ethan, we spoke last month during our eMarketer Summit about what was ahead for the holiday season. And now I am very excited to hear all of the great data that you have for us on the key trends shaping retail and consumer behavior in 2025, especially those on the shifting shopping patterns and also growth opportunities. But first, I want to remind our audience that they can access data from millions of US store visits each month by exploring the Placer 100 Retail and Dining Index on eMarketer.com. You can take a peek under the Resources tab to the right of the video player. And we are also so happy that you, Ethan, will be sticking around for a Q&A in the second part of the show. For our audience, just use the chat window on the right to submit any questions that you have. Ethan and I will do our best to get to as many of those as we can during the Q&A, so please keep them coming. We love to hear from you. All right, I cannot wait to hear what you have for us today, Ethan. Let's get started.
Amazing. Thanks again, Marissa. And thanks everyone for joining. Always excited to do this. As always, we want to do a quick introduction for those of you who are unfamiliar with Placer. So Placer is a location analytics company. What does that mean in the very simplest of terms? People vote with their feet. We show you how they vote across the United States every single day. We do that by observing a panel of tens of millions of mobile devices. Very critically, this is all aggregate data that has been stripped of identifiers like MAIDs. So we are GDPR and CCPA compliant. We then analyze that data with machine learning and AI algorithms and present it in a wealth of different reports within our platform on everything from true trade areas, visits, visit frequency, the visitor journey, cross-visitation, and a whole lot more. And Marissa, now I guess we get to start off with some final look backs at
I
2024.
know. Can you believe that we are already in December? It's so crazy. Like right now, we're right in the middle of the weeks between Thanksgiving and Christmas. We just completed this Cyber 12, which was a new term this year. But I have to ask you, because last we spoke, I was kind of jealous because I asked you a little bit about your holiday shopping. We were in early November, and you said you were way ahead of the game, and I was totally behind. So where are you right now with holiday shopping for this year?
I don't have it all. I don't have it all in my possession, but it's all been ordered. So I
Okay.
am in theory, barring a delivery issue, finished.
Ooh. All right. So does that mean like you're clicking on the tracking every single day and looking at where that package is?
In about a week, that's when I'll start having my panic clicking. I feel like I'm confident about things happening this week.
Okay. I hope you have a backup just in case, or like maybe an IOU can go in the card or something.
Oh, amen, amen. We have gift cards, right?
Right, exactly. But fingers crossed you get what you're looking for. I have progressed in my shopping journey. So I've been collecting things. If I hear something, I make sure I buy it so it doesn't go out of stock. Usually that's me running across the street here during, lunch or something to collect something in the Oculus across the street from our office just to make sure I have it. So good to hear that we are both well underway for the next few weeks. But tell me, so, when we take a look at the data, what does retail performance look like so far this holiday season? And quite honestly, I have to ask, is the holiday season as important as it used to be for retail?
So the holiday season as a whole is as important, if not more important than it was. I'd argue it's more important. Black Friday specifically, any of the individual days, I think are less important relatively, not because these aren't peaks, not because there aren't these significant surges in visits, whether they be online or offline, but because there are just other places to kind of get those deals. So if you just had Black Friday in the past and now you have Black Friday and Cyber Monday, it dilutes the power of Black Friday just a little bit because you have that other opportunity. We think about Super Saturday, the extended shopping season. We have all these elements that reduce the centrality of the day, even if it still remains significant amongst the most important. All these holidays are super significant. I think one of the really interesting things, though, has been like twofold. And we look at this in two interesting ways. One, who benefits from where? So while we talk a lot about Black Friday, Super Saturday, our favorite holiday at Placer is Turkey Wednesday, which is a day I give us credit for actually having named several years ago. But it's the biggest day for grocery visitation in the entire calendar year, and it's the Wednesday right before Thanksgiving. And you see these massive surges in visits. And what's interesting this year is you see it again, right? Like significant year-over-year visit growth for top grocery chains across the country. Overall category was up year over year by about 1%. It was 80% more than the daily average for the grocery segment. But what was really interesting was not just the grocery segment, but the beverage and alcohol segment saw a lift of 180% on the daily average up until that date, which meant the day before Thanksgiving, many people were like, we need to make sure we have in the home, something to help us get through this long weekend. And what it tells us is these opportunities are rampant. They are like all over the place throughout the holiday season, but they are different for every sector. And so what we really want to see over the holiday season is not brands that are saying, hey, this is important, it's not important, but it's which days are most important for us and why. Like, which ones do we lean into from an online perspective? Which ones do we lean into from an offline perspective? How do we take advantage of the myriad of opportunities that come with the holiday season?
Very interesting. Well, I was definitely at the grocery store very early on Wednesday to make sure I could get my last minute staples, all the perishables. And, it's interesting now we're going to go into the fitness category, which many people probably didn't really think about fitness for this past weekend with Thanksgiving and all the sweets and other things, and especially what's going to come over the next month. But fitness was actually one of the really big winners for 2024. So tell us why, and also what can we learn from the performance of the fitness category?
Yeah. So when we look at things like winners and we'll look at it whether it's with brands or with kind of an overall segment, we're trying to analyze those that have kind of these wider implications. So the fact that a segment does really well because they had great tailwinds, or someone does less well because they have headwinds, less thrilling for us. What's really exciting for us is when there is something that kind of teaches us more about the market. And I think we learn a lot about the consumer and retail overall from the fitness segment. And I think the thing we see that was really unique here is the success was across the board. So early on in that immediate post-pandemic environment, we saw value chains like Planet Fitness, Crunch Fitness, et cetera, doing really, really well. And more luxury-oriented chains not seeing the same recovery or the same speed of recovery. Yet the further distance we've got now, several years after, we actually see that success spread out. And that tells us that there is a segment that is really set up for the consumer where so many people can find their lane within a segment. And so it speaks to the strength of the segment and the pull that it has when it's not just one brand or one type or one kind of approach to that success. But I think what's really interesting here is not just the fact that it's successful, and not just the fact that it's successful in the face of some of the criticisms that it was facing just a few years ago, or the kind of doom and gloom narratives that were surrounding it. But I think also what we see about the rationality of the consumer and the fact that one size fits all approaches to retail, fitness, almost anything don't work. And there's lots of room for lots of players to be successful with different tactics. So what do we mean by that? If you look at like a Planet Fitness compared to a Lifetime that's really aiming for that country club experience, what you see is both of them succeeding, but succeeding in very different ways. So Planet Fitness will see lots of overall visitation, but they'll see lots of cross visitation with other fitness entities, whether it be like a Soul Cycle or, a CrossFit, some other means of working out, because it's cheaper. So it can be part of this wider mix that the individual has. When you look at Lifetime, they're much more built on loyalty, regular visits, right? Because they're more expensive. So you're looking to accomplish more within that single kind of chain that you look to focus on. And what it tells us is, again, this wide array of options that consumers are looking for. And consumers are making very rational decisions about what's the right fit for them. And lots of chains can succeed at the same time. That to us speaks to a segment that's really well positioned and driving a tremendous amount of success.
So true. And it's such a great point about it's not a one size fits all approach. Even you and I, before the show today, we're just talking about the differences in our approach to fitness. I've now become very much focused on working out at home. You take the opposite approach, going into the gym and thriving on that camaraderie with the other people in the class. So it's great to hear that, the fitness category overall has really performed well because they've taken so many different approaches to what fits with consumer preferences. But like, what about some other top performing retailers? What did they get right? And can the wider retail ecosystem like replicate that to make, their segments work well too?
Yeah, I think and we're going to dive into some of these elements more when we look at kind of 2025 trends. But brands that really stood out to us in 2024, among them was Trader Joe's. The reason Trader Joe's stuck out was they went against a lot of narratives that we have in retail and a lot of expectations that we have. So I think our assumption around grocery, our assumption around the consumer is that they're convenience oriented, they're looking to accomplish as much as possible in a single place. Yet Trader Joe's saw growth in the number of visitors traveling further distances. They saw growth in the amount of cross visitation as their visits grew. So meaning people were willing to make Trader Joe's a part of their mix, even if it wasn't the only part of their mix. They loved the brand, they loved the experience, they loved the products they can get there so much that they wanted to make it part of it, no matter what else they're doing on the grocery side. To us, that speaks to a chain that is just part and parcel of the day-to-day lives of their customer base. And I think it's super interesting, and there's a tremendous amount to be learned to it. And we'll dive into that convenience topic more. The other one for us was Costco Sam's Club. The club segment as a whole has been really exciting to watch. One, and for a few reasons. I think one, the level of success they've had in a fundamentally changing market over the last few years, for the last year especially. So if we think about kind of, obviously, we're going back, and it's like, oh my God, the distant future of 2020. Costco, Costco's average age of kind of visitor since that point has declined dramatically, which tells us something really fascinating, which is that as people move from the suburbs, as people move, excuse me, from the cities into the suburbs, they were ready to take advantage of this kind of new opportunity that a Sam's Club, a BJ's, a Costco presented. And it speaks to retailers that have a very clear value proposition that speaks to a specific audience at a specific stage of life within a specific region, et cetera. And so long as those regular cycles of people being in that stage of life, in that region, et cetera, they're going to see success. And the really cool thing is the adjacent innovations and areas they've been able to tap into to drive revenue. So whether it be really exciting innovations on the retail media side at a Sam's Club or at a Costco, whether it be the other types of offerings that they can launch as a result of the loyalty of their base. These are brands that we're really excited about. The last one was home goods, and I think it's the recovery. Like the home furnishing segment was not in the most amazing place this year. And I think the earliest sign of the turnaround in this space came from home goods. Now, obviously, the value orientation helps. But the fact that you have a segment that can rebound so effectively from a difficult period after you had that pull forward of demand in that immediate post-pandemic period, and then to see the lull and then the rise back up, again, speaks to one of these brands that doesn't just have a strong short-term period, but has the type of model and approach and brand recognition that drives long-term success.
All right, well, let's keep talking a little bit more about the home category and also bring in consumer electronics. The chart that you have here on the screen shows a lot more decreases than increases. You just talked about that dip that the home furnishings category has been experiencing. How can we use retail data really to better understand customer motivations and also the decision-making process?
Yeah, I think this is maybe my favorite data point of the entire year. And the reason I found it so exciting was that it was so contradictory with what we were hearing, right? Throughout the first 8, 9 months of the year, the conversation was like, uh-oh, consumers not feeling super confident, consumers feeling like they don't know where things are going to head, and they're really concerned about the future. And that was a lot of the kind of qualitative panel data, when we would ask folks things. What we saw looking at this was something really fascinating and very not what we were learning from some of those other data sources. And it was home furnishings and consumer electronics visitation starting to rise back up. Now, it wasn't amazing. This wasn't like, oh my God, everything is going great in the electronics or home furnishing segments. But it was significant recoveries. Like the gaps were shrinking and they were shrinking at a consistent basis. And what this told us was something really important. People visiting a home furnishing store means they're willing to at least really consider a purchase of a item at a home furnishing store. Same for consumer electronics. And these are not the cheapest items available. This isn't going to Dollar General. This is going to a place where I'm looking at a couch, and a couch is generally not the thing where I'm like, oh, fine, I'll get another one today. It's something that you're thought out about. It's something that you are actually going to plan around. It's something that you can push off fairly easily. Most of us are not like, oh my God, I need a couch and I need it tomorrow. It's a little bit more thought out than that. And so we saw this recovery. What we were seeing was a consumer that was becoming increasingly comfortable with the concept of making this big ticket purchase. And what was fascinating was in November, the Conference Board Consumer Confidence Index came out, And they saw the biggest month-over-month jump since I think it was March of 2021 in terms of consumer confidence, and the strongest point of the entire year in 2024. And the big lesson for us was not that qualitative data somehow has a problem. It doesn't. It's amazing. It's super critical and important because it's a sense of the sentiment and the why. But behavioral data is very often overlooked for its ability to tell us what a consumer is really thinking. And that alignment of both, and this is something, again, we're going to dive into a little bit deeper later, can give us a much more well-rounded view of the consumer, what's really driving their decisions, and we can uncover a lot of their what they're really thinking based on their actions. So it's very easy to, say you think something, but when we vote with our feet, we can have there's a lot of value to those decisions, the way we spend our time and the actions that we take.
So is it more just that the consumer is now physically back in these stores, or are they making those big ticket purchases?
This is the fact that again, I am not a person who says, let's go to the home furnishing store. What a fun day out, right?
To look around, right?
I think it's the kind of thing where you go and make that visit when there is a large degree of intent. And that intent signifies a growing level of comfort with making that purchase. So it doesn't always have to be one-to-one. You can see those purchases be delayed slightly. But that growing level of comfort is a significant indicator of where the mindset of the consumer as a whole.
All right. Well, good to know. And now I see we're at the point where we're going to take a look ahead to 2025. You talked
Reckless speculation.
the speculation. Well, you have a lot of great data here. I won't spoil it for everybody, but I'll let you share all the news. But we did talk a little bit earlier about convenience, and I know you promised to come back to that. So this is the time now. So really, how important is convenience in retail? We all love when something makes our lives easier. But really, what does this tell us about consumer behavior, and what will retail strategy evolve into in 2025?
I think there was this very famous Forbes article in the post-pandemic world, convenience is king. I think what we have learned over the last few years, but the last year especially, is that no, it's not. Maybe it's the Jack or the 10, but it's certainly not King or Ace. And how do we get to that conclusion, and what then potentially is so important, and what does that tell us about where retail's heading? So we get to that conclusion when we look at things like cross visitation. So in grocery, the number of visits people are making to grocery stores over the course of a set period of time has increased by a lot. So that if I was going to 3 grocery stores a week last year, I'm going to 4 or 5 this year. Now that means I'm willing to go get some items here and then get in my car, go to another place, or go home and another day of the week, do another trip to a different grocery store and get more items. Now that could be in the pursuit of value. That could be in the pursuit of products that I love, like Trader Joe's. It could be because there's an experience or prepared food thing that I want to take advantage of. But however you look at it, convenience is not the most important thing. Product quality, experience, value are all superior, or at least have a superior role in this case. We also see that from the distance people are willing to drive, like we mentioned before with Trader Joe's. And it's not just Trader Joe's, it's others that have this kind of unique selling point. And this tells us something really interesting about the consumer and about convenience. So about convenience, it tells us that the way we now perceive it is convenience is a binary question. It is either convenient enough or it is not convenient enough. But once we get past that willingness to drive further, that willingness to visit out more places, excuse me, tells us something really interesting, that the consumer is willing to do more to get the thing that they really want. And then therefore, the battle now shifts from, we think that immediate post-pandemic period when we were making fewer visits, but those visits had a longer duration. They had a higher magnitude, a larger basket size. That's now turning around. The visit is a key element. How do I drive that visit in my store? But the focus of how do I grab more share of that shopping list? How do I create more loyalty within a space where people are willing to make more visits? That becomes the new battleground. And so those elements that brands can do to up-level experience, to up-level their ability to provide value on the right products, or to bring the right products that draw the visit to begin with, is going to receive a premium in the year and years to come.
Absolutely. I know we're seeing so many different ways in which loyalty is changing, really, to keep consumers, in that store, to increase the basket size, to increase the time that they spend in there and the products that they see. I know we're going to dive into some of that in a little bit. I want to talk now about some of the segments that have had some challenges and some struggles in 2024, but that have then rebounded. A great example of this is Barnes and Noble. We've also seen examples in categories like fitness, which we talked about earlier, movie theaters, department stores. So how should these recoveries really impact the way we view those difficult periods?
I think we need to embrace the difference between uh, periods that demand evolution and periods that signal kind of inevitable decline, right? So, and there are things that, signal inevitable decline. Like, there are technological changes that make certain things outdated, and therefore we have brands that are, no longer going to be there as a result. But in most cases, when we see a challenge, it's a cry for the need to change and evolve, as opposed to something that's, a segment is in its entirety is doomed. I think the book space has been fascinating. Look at Books a Million, Barnes and Noble, these really significant recoveries. And there's a lot of things that drive it. If you think, Books a Million really leaned hard into this Starbucks-esque third place concept. We're like, hey, come study here. Come do your Dungeons and Dragons club here. I don't really know how Dungeons and Dragons work, but people would do that in a Books a Million store. And I think that the on the Barnes and Noble side, this creating of like a place that had a draw. I wanted to spend time. It has a local feel. The local operator was given more control. It told us that it wasn't that the bookstore was dead or, in doomed. It said that it needed to change in order to continue to have a draw. And I think when we think about what are the other segments that have gotten this label, and maybe unfairly, movie theaters, one we've talked about a lot, has received that kind of moniker as, potentially being doomed. Yet it probably just needs to evolve. It shouldn't be competing with Netflix. It should be asking, where can I provide something that's more valuable? I think department stores fit the bill there too, as well. Like department stores, there's been a lot of struggles. A lot of folks have opined correctly about some of the challenges that are facing that segment. But when we kind of pull back, there's still a tremendous draw. There's still tremendous brand awareness. And that ability to evolve, it's a better curation, it's the ability to kind of put things together, make the shopping experience more exciting, more streamlined. There is this potential capacity to level up. And I would argue folks that already have brand awareness have a distinct advantage. We often underestimate just how hard it is to go from zero to something big. Retailers that are already large, that already have that kind of brand value, their ability to pivot and adapt, if they have the capacity internally, is very, very strong.
Yeah, and it seems like just getting a little bit creative can really change the game in terms of the perception from the customer and just a completely different experience when entering some of those stores. I also want to talk a little bit more about creative and also about certain promotions, because those are often game changers when there's a really cool promotion or ad creative. An example would be Wendy's. They saw huge success from key promotions this year. What would your advice be for our audience on ways to better maximize control over performance?
So I think what was really shocking for me was I looked at, what you mentioned this at the top of the Placer 100. We looked at the Placer 100 between October and November, and we saw this really significant shift. And we looked at on a visits per location basis who was up. We saw Wendy's was way up, and for me, it wasn't registering. And then I kind of did the analysis. We saw this one day where there was this huge peak. It was October 8th, and it was the launch of the Krabby Patty promotion, which is this kind of SpongeBob themed concept at Wendy's. And it was massive and it was huge, drove huge visits. And I think one of the things that it triggered for us was this idea of just how much control or how much control, how much power great marketing, great advertising, great concepts really gives to brands across different segments. And, while ensuring that we give the proper hats off and kudos to Wendy's, interestingly, one of the brands that to me really captures this concept in its fullest is one that's taken a lot of heat this year, Starbucks. And I look at Starbucks for kind of four things that it does that I think are super significant. So the first is this idea of like control. Like what do I mean by control? How do I make peaks bigger? How do I make weaknesses longer? So let's view this as like two pieces. First is I want to make my peak as effective as it possibly can be. So think about the pumpkin spice latte launch. When does it come? The end of August, early September. When is Starbucks' best period in terms of overall foot traffic? It's the fall and winter. Guess what isn't in the fall? Late August, early September. So why is it launched then? To give you that sense, to bring you back into the store, to expand out that high season. The other thing you want to do when we're trying to kind of exert control is figure out how do we lift our weakest points. So these are when we want to throw our hair in the areas. These are the things where it's like, look, it's already not a great week for me. I have this crazier concept. Let's try it. Like the one that really popped, and this is the first time I looked at it, began my analytical obsession with Starbucks, was the tie-dye Frappuccino. Tie-dye Frappuccino showed a was on the weakest year, and it gave a lift year over year to weekly visits. It wasn't a drink that crushed that everyone's like dying for again, but it was a nice move to to try something in a period where otherwise there would be weakness and to drive some visitation alongside of it. The third thing you want to see is adjacency and taking advantage of opportunities that come your way. So we talked about this last time with the kind of full lunar eclipse and the brands that were in line with the eclipse and who took advantage and who didn't. Some of the biggest days for Starbucks are actually on days that are huge retail days for everyone else. So Black Friday sees a massive peak. Turkey Wednesday, massive peak, because when you have to go run out and do all that grocery shopping, you know what you're facing when you get back home. So you'll stop and you'll get yourself a coffee, treat yourself, right? Black Friday in the middle of all that shopping, looking for the gifts for the whole family and friends and everyone, you get to have this treat along the way. So it's being able to take advantage of the opportunities that come your way. And then the last bit is doing so in a way that kind of drives long-term value. So, a few years ago when they had Red Cup Day, you had to use the app to get the red cup. And they know that the app drives loyalty. Amazing victory. And I think when we think about the control that brands have, so much of the conversation in the last few years has been around headwinds and tailwinds. That conversation is going to start dissipating. And the conversation we're going to be having is which brands take control, are able to take the bull by the horns and drive real success, and which ones are kind of left flapping in the wind. And I think you see just tremendous concepts and a lot of success that comes from it.
Wow, those were great examples. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. So much to digest, and I can certainly see a lot of that in my own behavior from this past Black Friday, stopping to get a coffee because you're exhausted and you just want a little treat for yourself. And of course, the line is so long because everyone else is doing the same thing. All right, so we're going to move into bringing retail media into the mix, always something that we have to bring up when talking about retail. Advertisers, and everybody across the retail space is really trying to embrace behavioral data. We talked about behavior and those patterns earlier when thinking about large ticket items, but utilizing the demographics and psychographic data. How does that shift align with what we're seeing with retail media?
So there's a few things. One, we know how important demographics and psychographics are, and they are super significant, and there's so many ways to use them and to view audiences differently. What we love about retail media, especially within the physical environment, is there's a unique capacity to leverage psychographics and demographics to do different types of breakdowns. And by that we mean, imagine, I don't know, Marissa, you and I have decided we launch a retailer together and we have 100 locations. We could go to the world and say, hey, we have 100 locations. Who wants to advertise on our new exciting retail media network? The other thing we could do is say, hey, we have 30 locations that speak really well to audience X, 30 locations that speak really well to audience Y, and 40 locations that speak really well to audience Z. And then we could charge a premium for each one of those audiences, find the right fit, maximize our inventory, and create this really great win-win-win. And so the first win is for us. We maximize our inventory. The second is for the brands, whether it's endemic or non-endemic, who want to advertise but can now find this exact audience they're looking for. And the third person who wins is the consumer, because the consumer is given the right messaging in the right location. So I don't know, imagine I'm vegan and I walk into a store where, I don't know, all the vegans live, right? I don't think it actually works like that, but let's just assume. I go to the store, it has all the vegans, and the messaging there, and the products there, and the experience there is built around me, the happy vegan. And this is exactly what, in theory, we'd want to be able to do. The added layer that we're seeing now that I think is really exciting is the behavioral element. So psychographics and demographics are great. Behavior, in some cases, is even better. And at the very worst, it's a wonderful complement. And so things like where else I shop, how many times I shop at specific locations, all of those are really powerful indications of who I might be as a shopper. So let's take the fitness element before. If I go to Lifetime and I cross visit with, I don't know, your local Target, I might be more oriented towards high-end health food, right? Whereas if I'm Planet Fitness, I might be just as oriented towards health food, but I might be looking for it at a slightly greater value. And so some of these things can really unlock relationships, at the worst, unlock correlations. But I'd make the argument that whereas demographics and psychographics are much more likely to be correlated, behavior is a much more causal relationship because it's the thing that drives the visits. The motivations are proven out by the behavior itself. And the more we embrace this type of behavior, and I think it's going to happen significantly in the retail media space, the more we'll be able to provide better access to the right audiences, bringing the right products to those audiences and the right messaging on top.
Right. And as we know, the consumer is in so many different places at so many points in their day. So, of course, the term omni-channel has to come into the mix. This is a term we've been using for many years now. How will omni-channel retail influence future retail strategy?
So I'm going to do something that's weird and slightly contradictory, but go with me. I think the word omni-channel is not good. I'm still going to use it because I think we've all accepted
Okay,
that
because
that
everyone
it's a
else
word.
uses it.
Yeah, everyone else uses it. It's understandable, and sometimes you don't want to use the same word over and over again, and so it's going to be part of the lexicon. But what omni-channel says is you need all channels, and that's kind of what ended up happening. Every many retailers said, "Hey, we need to have an online website, we need to have social media, and we need to have buy online, pick up at store. We need to have this, and we need to have all these things." Very often they built it out in a way that now, oh, look, I have 75 channels. Who's excited? You must be excited, consumer. But it was clunky. It didn't communicate. It didn't create the best experience. And a shout out to our good friend Steve Dennis. I think the right terminology is harmonized retail. Harmonized retail says we want to have not every channel, but we want to have a larger number of channels that work well together. They actually provide something better for the consumer on the other side of this equation. And I think the best way of looking at it is something like what we call the omni loop, right? This is the conversation we were having around grocery. If I go into a grocery store and I do my shop, I walk through the aisles, I get cereal, I get fresh produce, I buy meat, and I get a giant thing of paper towels, and I put that giant Charmin thing of paper towels in my cart, and I go through to the checkout. Wouldn't it be interesting if they said, hey, this the other stuff, look, we know you want to come in and you want to hold your lemons up to the light and talk to the guy behind the counter about which fish you should take for this kind of meal you want to cook. But you love Charmin. You're going to run out of this in about a month. Order it to we'll deliver it to your house. Amazing. Amazing. Then when it's delivered to my house, it's like, hey, you want to come into the store? I mean, we got all this fresh produce. You want to check it out. You weren't here last week. Get me back into the store. Now, obviously, this is a very simplistic example, but the concept is not how do I hit you with as many things as possible? Oh, you're in a store, use the QR code. You're in the QR code, now go to this other video digital experience. Now put on your weird headset and be in the metaverse. That doesn't work. What works is an approach to retail that asks, what does each channel do best? And how do we optimize a journey across those different channels? So physical stores are better for certain aspects of the customer journey across different segments. If it's clothing, let's take a great clothing example. One of the gifts I got for myself this year was I love True Classic. They're one of my favorite brands. They make great menswear. I got a new item that I haven't tried yet. I tried on that item. The first time I tried the brand, I saw their social media ads. I saw their social media ads. I was super interested. When I was in a city, I was in Dallas. They had a location there. I walked into the location. I found my size. Oh, fits really nice. Great. I bought one shirt on that visit. I have proceeded to buy many, many more shirts in that same size over time. I wanted to try out this new product, but wasn't sure it would have the same fit. And the last time I was in New York, I tried it on in their store there. Tried it on, found the fit, and now bought more of this product and actually got it for my brother too. That's the ideal situation. That's saying, hey, I found my size. That's the best thing I can do in this store. Now continue shopping online. Amazing. I've accomplished everything I can. I don't need to know, for me, I don't need to see the blue color in person. I just want to make sure the fit's right. Then bring me back to the store when you have a new product or something more valuable that you can bring me that does better in the store than it would online. And that's how we want to see retail evolving. And I think we're going to see significant steps in this coming year. And I'll add an S on top because it's going to take some time. But this idea that you don't need to have everything, and you don't need to jam all. Doesn't need to be overstimulating. It needs to be about providing the right experience to the customer at the right stage of the journey.
All right. I love that example of the loop. So thank you for sharing that with us. One thing that you and I have talked about frequently is really the fact that people have moved a lot in the past 5 years, especially millennials. Audiences have literally moved, which has created significant, opportunities and challenges in retail. You talked earlier today about the fact that the age of shoppers at stores like Costco has significantly decreased. So how can the wider industry adapt to this?
I think it's a question that, we talked about this at the time in very, very kind of broad terms. Hey, there's an opportunity that comes from the fact that audiences move. Super true. Absolutely. I think there are some core questions we need to ask. The first question is, where is your audience? And then the corollary to that is, where are you? So you as a retailer, like, where are your locations? Because we have seen situations where I was targeting a specific audience. That audience moved somewhere else. They're no longer there. And I need to move too as a result in order to capture that audience because I'm not set up to take advantage of that next wave of people who are going to fill that space. I think the other question is, how has my audience changed? And is there a way I need to adapt to change with them? Right. And those are the big questions when we think about kind of migration and pattern shifts. When we think about someone like Sam's Club, and we called this out earlier when we were talking about Costco as well, is the the value offering that they bring to the table, which is you're going to walk into the store, you're going to find things you want at a great price. You're probably going to walk in with a list of, I don't know, X number of things and leave with 20% more than you had on your list. Oh, is it weird that we have TVs there? Of course it's weird, but you're going to go with it. I mean, maybe even consider buying one. There's going to be a weird thing of clothes in the middle, but you're going to go along on this journey with us because the experience is so amazing. And over time, you're going to get deeper and deeper into the morass of this joyous shopping experience. Amazing. The fact that the audience has changed, has more space, can take advantage, lives in the suburbs, has a big pantry, isn't living in the small 2 or 3 bedroom apartment anymore. That is now I am ready for them. But what about the city environment? Let's do this kind of thought experiment where a younger audiences or this millennial audience is moving from the suburbs into the city. Who's filling the spots in the city? Maybe it's kind of a younger audience that's now like, hey, I had to live in Hoboken, but now I can make it into the Upper West Side. Or maybe it's an older audience that's looking to downsize from their suburban home into the city. Are the right retailers set up to fulfill those needs? They don't necessarily need a Costco anymore, or they're not yet in the Costco waves. Who's going to speak to them? A lot of the transitions we are seeing, and a lot of the transitions we still will see, are not about a retailer that is good or bad, struggling or thriving. It's about retailers that have to adjust to changing orientations of their customer. And I think we can learn so much about this. For example, if I am saying that this millennial, who else speaks to a millennial that has more space? Who else speaks to an audience that might have lots of disposable income, might be an older couple that's living in a city? And how can they take advantage? I think understanding these shifts and positioning yourselves alongside them can bring a lot of value to them.
All right. Well, I need somebody to talk to me as a millennial who still lives in that small space in the city. But, it does bring up a good point because no matter where the audience is, I of course grew up in the suburbs, but I've lived in the city for over 20 years. But, some of those bigger format stores that I remembered are not here as much. But now we're seeing all of these, whether it's a smaller format store or in some cases a larger format that had not been in the city before, there's been a lot of buzz around this in terms of new retail formats. So, give me your honest answer here. Is this trend exciting to you? Is it not? What's the story here?
Kind of. I mean, and I bring up this topic now a lot because it's one of the things that we hear talked about most. And I think it gets buzz that it doesn't always deserve. So there are large format stores and smaller format stores, and all of it's wonderful. But the question is why, right? The idea it was an interesting conversation I was having with a consultant in the retail space. We were almost having a venting session about this topic. And one of the things that this gentleman said was what people don't like to talk about small format stores is you need to have less products in the store because it's a smaller format and you don't have so much space. And so lots of retailers are like, oh, I can now get into this market and I can be in this space. But they're not ready to actually say, well, what products do I need if I have to cut 10 to 20% of what I can put in a store? How do I optimize it for this audience? Is this my core audience? Because I've had this big format, small formats, and now there's all these kind of different rules of the game. So I think the answer is it can be very, very valuable. It could be something hugely significant for retail if we can figure out how to optimize merchandising on a per location basis for urban environments where I have a smaller format, or a suburban environment where I have a larger format. If I could figure out that mix and that level of nuance, amazing upside, huge potential. But it's challenging to do. And until I think retailers really grapple with that question, it creates a little bit of an obstacle of how do you maximize the fact that the store is smaller doesn't mean it's going to be more successful and vice versa being at large of it being larger. It means you need to be more focused, and the brands that have that capacity are going to see a lot more success than those that don't.
All right, well, good to know. So I just have a few more questions for you before we get to that live Q&A. So I want to remind our audience, please keep those questions coming. You've all been great so far, so keep those coming in for us very shortly. We just talked about some of those other different types of format stores, but what's been interesting is that in recent quarters, we've seen some challenges in these value-oriented retail and luxury stores. The data on the screen here is showing mostly jumps in, spring, summer, roughly. What does that mean for the retail segment more broadly?
So I think there's a really important narrative that has proven out to be pretty true in retail, and that's the bifurcation of retail. Bifurcation of retail says things move luxury and they move value. And we've seen that. There's more competition in the luxury lane and there's more competition in the value lane. Lots of expansions from the Dollar Generals, Dollar Trees, Big Lots, Five Belows of the world. And now we're seeing some challenges in both of those areas, right? We're seeing some store closures on the value lane because they were just overextended, right? It's not that they're bad. It's not that there's not excitement. There's tons of excitement. They're amazing retailers, but there's just not endless opportunity for expansion of locations. In the luxury lane, we've seen some challenges with in recent earnings calls. And again, not that there's some existential crisis, it's just not endless growth opportunity in any of these areas. But if you have pushed towards the extremes, where is the opportunity? And to us, the opportunity lies in the middle. And what's interesting is this is a theory we had 3 or 4 years ago about, and it was what we used to define why Target was doing so well. And it's something that we now believe in even more. And I think we're going to see a lot of it in the near term. And for us, that sits on not who is value and who is luxury, but who understands that nuanced approach to it that speaks to the middle. So think about brands like Ulta. They have higher end products within their locations and they have more value oriented because they know that for each individual, there is a mix that they're looking for. So I think you're going to see a lot of excitement and attention in the middle lane. You're already seeing it from the value space where kind of Five Below pushing up market, Dollar General pushing up market with Top Shelf. I think you're going to see the same from luxury looking to go down. I think there's a huge amount of opportunity in the middle because there is less competition, and we'll see that bounce back from the bifurcation.
All right, those are great points. Last question before we go to the Q&A. I want to ask you about the mall. We've talked about this a lot. The mall has seen a lot of positive growth. We've seen a lot of different formats that have taken place over the past few years within the mall. What could that mean for the overall segment in 2025? And really, can this success continue?
Yeah, I mean, imagine we do this webinar in January of 2030. If we were saying who was the greatest retail winner of the decade, early odds would be on the mall. And it's because as recently as 5, 6 years ago, we were convinced that the mall was dying. That this kind of image we had of, someone walking through a mall with like 18 bags in the crook of their arm was like a dead model. No one was ever going to happen. Yet the mall has evolved and it's become something far more powerful than we expected. On Black Friday, we saw visits up at malls higher than they were up at many of the retailers that are in the malls, which tells us that this significant shift that the mall has made to being a place where people have experiences, retail, dining, entertainment, movies, etc., all under one roof is seeing a significant recovery. And it's not just about the retail, it's about the whole collective together. Now, what's fascinating here is that we expect this to continue. Malls are leaning into things like retail media. They're recognizing that they are a platform. They're leaning into more edgy, retail quote unquote concepts like Tesla locations, which again should make no sense. They're being much more creative with the types of installs and exhibits they have, the reasons to visit to drive some urgency. And as the malls gain more power and more control over the process, they're able to experiment more, try out new concepts, bring new types of value, new types of experience that create a more differentiated mall landscape, which means that there's more reason for the wider segment to see a lift because it's not every mall looks exactly the same. It's copy and paste in one direction or the next. This differentiation is positive because it creates more optionality for what they can fill their malls with from a tenant perspective, which means the likelihood that the mall 20 minutes to the east or 20 minutes to the west have such a different feel that I wouldn't mind visiting in back-to-back weekends. And that creates power for a longer term value in this overall segment that could leak down even to those not top tier malls, but that B class, etc.
All right. Well, good to know. And now, as you said on the screen, it is time for questions. We have had such great engagement from our audience. So thank you all so much for participating. Ethan, I could literally talk to you about retail all day. So thank you so much for all of this great info. Let me get
You.
your take on this one. Do you have any insights on how in-store traffic overlays with e-commerce traffic by category? Holiday shopping seems to have shifted online.
So there's a lot of things, a lot. So the interesting question, there's two parts to that question. So the first is how does online and offline interact? And I think it interacts very differently across different sectors. But the idea that things have moved online doesn't mean that that they've moved away from offline. There's this combination. And so we'll see a lot of visitation to physical retail stores from the discovery perspective. Hey, finding the product that I want, trying things out, checking out different brands. But then I still might make the ultimate purchase online. I think I recently had the experience of taking my 12-year-old to buy sneakers, finding what she loved, finding that the size, whatever and a half was too small and whatever, and a half the other way was too big, and then going online and buying the shoe because they didn't have the size in stock. That's not a bad thing for the retailer. The retailer still won the purchase, and they won the purchase to a large extent because my daughter could touch and feel the product. It doesn't, the fact that where the ultimate transaction takes place is not the only thing that matters. It's how does each element within a retailer's wider arsenal, how do they influence the long-term customer journey? And ideally, that lifetime value that you're going to get. So do it induce more loyalty and ongoing purchases in the future? So it does, first of all, the point that it changes by vertical is super significant, absolutely correct. But the idea that just because a purchase takes place online or offline, that it somehow negates the value of those other channels, I think is not 100% correct.
All right. Well, thank you for that. So I have another question for you. I know you're a huge proponent of the experience that a customer gets in store when they connect with the
Yeah.
sales associate. So this is in
Yeah.
line with that. How would you connect your in-person shopping experience to the salesperson so that it feels connected to what you're also doing online?
I mean, look, everyone talks about personalization. Personalization is really difficult. I think um, if you can get consumers to be part of this and then you can give them, hey, I saw you bought, oh, can I pull up your profile or what you bought? Oh, amazing. I saw that you bought jeans. This shirt goes so well with that jeans. Well, amazing, right? That's an incredible experience. But even if it's not that, even if I imagine I can't do personalization, if I can just empower the professional in the store to provide me a better experience, the impact it could have on my likelihood to purchase that day or in the future is massive. And I think if we say experience is important in retail, we need to ask the follow-up question of, okay, well, who are the gatekeepers to experience? And I think it's the in-store associates. And so the more we empower them to provide a great experience, the more we incentivize them to provide a great experience, the better off the actual consumer is going to be, the more they're going to purchase and the happier they're going to be with the experience overall.
All right. It's so great when you have such a great salesperson in store that just completes that whole
100%.
package for you. We are going to take one more question today. Lastly, I want your take on really what's ahead. I mean, you told us a lot about what's ahead for 2025, but specifically, there's been a lot of supply chain uncertainties. There's been shifting economic conditions. What challenges are likely to reshape retail strategies next year?
I think I actually think that it's going to be a positive retail environment overall. So I don't think this is going to be again, there's some massive I mean, who the hell knows? And we've seen so many crazy things happen in the last few years, but I don't think that we have any indication that there's some massive headwind or tailwind that is going to drive retail. I think we are back to the place of retailers that have a great product that people really want, that know how to distribute it effectively, that know how to market it and bring that messaging to the right audiences, they're going to see success. And I think we talked about kind of the creative control. I think there is a moment for retailers to look in the mirror and realize they are very powerful, they are very significant, they have the ability to drive influence and drive value for the consumer and excitement for the consumer. And it's going back to basics. How do you provide a great product at value? And value doesn't mean cheapest. It means at something, something can be worth $80 and I think it's worth value. And I think something can be worth $10 and I think it's value. It's very different. But leaning into those kind of basics of what makes great retail is going to drive a lot of the success.
I can't wait. I'm so excited for next year. Are you?
Me too. Yeah, I'm all about it.
I really am. Well, thank you, Ethan, so much for always bringing us such great content. I can't wait to see how all these predictions play out in 2025. You have certainly given us so much to think about. And thank you for always bringing so much great information to our viewers. It was great to be with you today.
Thanks so much, Marissa. Happy holidays. Thanks everyone for joining.
Happy holidays. And I also, before we leave, I want to remind everyone to please check out the Placer 100 Retail and Dining Index on eMarketer.com to dive deeper into some of the data discussed here today, in addition to lots of other great resources from Placer AI. And before we close, let me just share a few things happening on eMarketer's media channels. You can register for live analyst and tech talk webinars on our events page at emarketer.com/webinars, /events. And don't forget to tune into Behind the Numbers, which is our daily podcast. And of course, please subscribe to our newsletters. Thank you all for joining us today. And thanks again to Ethan, the team at Placer AI, and our eMarketer studio team behind the scenes for making this webinar possible. We'll see you all on the next Tech Talk.